Welcome to Digital Habit Building. In the next 25 minutes, we'll be talking about something Charlene already mentioned, being distracted, or mainly about how new work habits will make you more productive and happier in your daily work. Before we dive into the topic, I'd like to tell you a little bit why I am talking about this topic. I studied business and then co-founded my first company in the nanobiotech sector, then switched to the digital sector where I was working with and for startups, mainly to set up new digital businesses or units. And 5 years ago, I founded my current company, the Digital Leaders Institute, where we consult and train in the field of digital business and also new ways of working. And to me, that was a real turning point. Now I'm starting to share my screen with you because although I was always used to working a lot, at that time my son had just turned 1 year old. And since I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible, I decided to run DLI on a part-time basis. And to me, it showed that that's just something was changing in the way we work, or at least that's how it felt, that there's starting something new. Because I did not only have less time to work, but I also realized how inefficient and ineffective I was during the times I was working. And when I was reading an article and I came across this number, it really struck me what's starting to emerge in this new way of working. And it was 10 minutes. And 10 minutes is or was then the average amount of time we were able to work without being interrupted. And as I said, that was the beginning, or at least to me, I realized it was the beginning of a change we see in the workplace. And don't get me wrong, I love the major shift we are seeing in the way we work. Companies get more innovative, hierarchies get flatter, more people are working more in startup, things get more entrepreneurial. But I'd like to talk more about the downsides of what's going on right now, and sometimes maybe things that we don't really talk about. Because the key element of the changes we are seeing in a positive and in a negative way is collaboration tools that we can use to collaborate in real time. And while it started before the pandemic, the virus has accelerated everything. And I think most of us know how such a digital work style or life can be draining or difficult. And to show you some more and also updated stats on how this new work reality looks like. I'm not telling you something new, that you spend approximately 30% of your daily time with emails and messages. And by the way, when I mention emails, I always include also messages. That another number is that we multitask up to 4 hours per day. Our favorite task is sending emails during a meeting, which is especially easy when we have our camera switched off in a virtual meeting. And sorry, by the way, for all of you who haven't been there in the before, you can just ask or post questions in the chat. I'll come back to them later in the end. And the third number, and that's the updated number of the 10 minutes I mentioned earlier, is that the latest studies say that we get interrupted every 6 minutes. And there are 3 main reasons. Number one is we get a notification, so we check an email or a message. The other factor is that we get interrupted by a colleague, which doesn't happen that often, but it takes the most time. And the third reason, I was a real expert in this, we just interrupt ourselves. For example, you're working on a presentation and then you think, I might need to Google this, or I need to send a message to this person, and we just jump to something else. And the fourth number doesn't make it much better or even worse, that studies say that it takes us up to 23 minutes to be able to fully concentrate again after being interrupted, which is also called attention residue. And probably the best way to define it, or when you realize it, that you're working on something, then you realize there is a meeting, you jump into that meeting, and the first time of the meeting just flies by because you're stuck somewhere else, because this attention residue is the higher the is even higher when you haven't finished what you've done before. What is the consequence? And I think that was my main takeaway back then. We are basically we're constantly busy, but we are neither productive nor satisfied. And being productive is a very, very important factor of being satisfied. It's interesting when you read, for example, of culture change, then sometimes people say you first need to get people productive, and then you can engage them. And of course, that's true for each individual, because we want to have the feeling of having accomplished something by the end of the day. Yeah, and sometimes it feels like, and especially when I talk to people, and when Charlene said, I'd like to hear of if other people feel the same when I talk to companies or people and teams, they often say they feel like being part of a fire brigade, that they need to be in a constant alarm mode, that they need to check their emails and see what's going on. And that's how we behave. We constantly check what's going on and be on standby, so that we can reply or do something. And to me, especially when you check emails all the time, it's to me like no fireman would ever always check emails to see whether there's a fire going on or not. But that's what like most of the companies are working right now. Why is this so stressful? And I'd like to say that we are working with technologies 4.0, but we still have a brain 1.0, and which is not a bad thing. It's just important to know that our brain is working in a specific way, and to understand the effects the new way of working or the new work mode has on us. I'd like to present you four things. And number one is our brain is wired for survival. So, which means we're scanning for potential dangers and can be easily distracted. And the problem is our brain doesn't distinguish between a tiger that attacks us or a notification we get. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why notifications are red, especially and of course, some of you are working maybe in startups who know this because you want to attract your customers. But of course, this also works in the workplace. So red means danger. Some companies are already switching to more subtle tones, but still, as soon as something moves, we are distracted and pay attention to that. Number two, our brain energy is limited. And unfortunately, the current work style even depletes us of more energy, which means constantly switching tasks, multitasking, and being interrupted costs us even more energy. The third fact, and some of you might know Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Kahneman and Tversky won the Nobel Prize 20 years ago with this finding, and the distinguish between the slow thinking and the fast thinking mode, which is here represented in the rider, which is our ratio, our slow thinking mode, but also costs us a lot of energy, and the fast thinking mode, our emotions, which doesn't need a lot of energy. And unfortunately, or maybe just that's a fact, the more stressed out we are, the more likely it is our elephant takes over, because we don't have that much energy. We just go into the low energy mode. And now, final fact, and we said we're going to talk about digital habit building, is we are creatures of habit. And what is a habit? And of course, there are many definitions, but I like the one of Charles Duhigg, who is one of the pioneers in habit science, who says a habit is a behavior that starts as a choice. Choice means it's a slow thinking, ratio high energy, the rider's choice, and then becomes a nearly unconscious pattern, which means habits are part of our elephant. It's what almost happens automatically. Typical examples: teeth brushing, and if you have a child, you know this is by far not automated, and we need to really learn that. Or another example of a habit could be checking emails all the time, but also getting annoyed by anything, or whatever we do on a regular basis. Yeah, and it's a fact that individuals and teams have created a number of habits in the new workplace that are just not beneficial, neither to our productivity nor to our well-being. And I might have not told you already that many new things, or maybe I might not tell you that maybe not even new things, or not all of them will we knew what I'm talking about later. Because we all know that knowledge doesn't equal change. And one of the reasons is because change happens in the habits, not in our brain, not in the ratio, not in the rider, it happens in the elephant. So the good news is we can change habits, we can train habits. We can train them good and bad habits. And unfortunately, bad habits are much easier to train because they don't cost that much energy. For example, it's much easier to watch Netflix all the time or check emails because it's just easier to be distracted than to focus. But as I said, we can train them. To do that, I think it's important to understand how habits work. And the typical sequence of a habit is it starts with a trigger. Can be anything: place, time, emotional status. Like people who smoke, usually it's if you're stressed, you're starting to smoke, or people who surround you, or something that has happened before. For example, getting up or logging into your laptop. And one trigger could be you get a notification. Then what happens then is the habit itself, the routine. For example, after you get a notification, you check your email or your message. What happens then, and that's important to manifest a habit, is that you get a reward. And in the case of checking your email, it could be the feeling that you have helped someone, or that you have gotten something done already. And of course, that's a fourth assumption. It's also called completion bias, because our brain doesn't distinguish between having a little task or a big task. Just by ticking something off, we have the feeling we've accomplished something, although it might be the most important email in your life. And what is then important, you need to repeat it, and then it becomes a real habit. 2 tips for building a new habit before we dive into specific habits I'd like to introduce to you. And number 1 is take few but very, very small action steps. What usually happens, especially with the ambitious people among us, we go somewhere, we are totally inspired, and then we think we would need to change everything overnight. And that costs a lot of energy, the rider, and then it's much more difficult to implement that because we don't have that much energy. So starting small motivates the elephant because it sees a progress, and costs the rider less energy. So be very specific and start small. Number 2, and that might sound counterintuitive to the common narrative that it means like you just need to be disciplined and you need to put a lot of willpower into it, is make it as easy as possible so that it doesn't cost you that much energy. For example, if you don't want to check emails all your time, switch off notifications, or if you don't want to check your mobile all the time, just put it away, so it makes it more difficult for you to perform that habit. The opposite is true for bad habits. You need to make it as difficult for you as possible. For example, I used to have the habit for checking emails in the evening or in the night, and so I deleted my password from my mobile, so it's much easier, more difficult for me to log into that account. And it reminds me, go back to the rider, because the elephant wants to check the email, that I didn't want to check email. So I'd like to introduce you to 3 elements you can focus on in regard to digital habit building. And I borrowed a framework called the productivity funnel from Cal Newport in his latest book, and you'll learn about him later, or the first book I came across from him, and it's called the Productivity Funnel. And I think it's very simple, but that's why I like it so much. That he divides our daily productivity into 3 levels: how we select our tasks, it's the activity selection, how we organize them, and then how we execute. And I'd like to start with the execution, because to me that was the big game changer when I said that I had I realized that the 10 minutes interruption fact. And I think this is one of the things, and you already mentioned that this being distracted is that we don't have the time or the ability even to concentrate. And that's the book I mentioned from Cal Newport, the first I came across, which is called Deep Work. And the idea is so simple that it's almost strange that it can have such a big impact, because it just basically means it's making us able to think, achieve, and result, and be satisfied again. Because as I said, that's one of the major points. And when I talk to teams about this or individuals about this topic, sometimes people come back to me later and said, like, it's the first time in years that I had like a really productive day, because I just switched off everything. Of course, it's not possible for any work environment, but it's just you can just immediately feel the benefits if you try it. What's the core principle? Number one is focus on just one thing. And even if you just do and start with that, it's just doing one thing and not being doing two things or doing several things on at the same time. And that ideally, and that's the main purpose, that creates value. So focus on just one thing that creates value. Eliminate all distractions. And of course, one of them is mainly notifications, who also train us, and that's the as I said, you can train also bad habits, that we're getting trained of being not disrupted, interrupted all the time. And of course, who especially who has kids at home or lives with someone else, and during the lockdown time, it was of course more difficult to eliminate all these distractions. But it's just one thing you should try to focus on, like the external distractions, because we've already gotten so many internal distractions within ourselves. The third point is that you should do that within a certain period of time. And if you start doing that, if you're not used to being concentrated, it can be maybe that you start with like 30 minutes with a very small time span. And when I tried to do deep work in the beginning, I think I wasn't even able to do that for like 5 minutes, because I was constantly switching tasks, and my brain was jumping to different places. And like if I have a day that allows to do that, I can work for like hours without even noticing it. And I'd like to introduce you to some execution habits for deep work. And number one, as I said that, and it might sound boring, but it's really turning off all your notifications. Even if you think it doesn't distract you, it does. And especially the ones who have their the audio on, it distracts everybody else. Number two is block time for your emails or your messaging. I was just talking to a friend, and she said that was such a big thing for her, just to block time so that she doesn't constantly check emails. For example, I do emails in the very beginning, and then I check them during the next period that I'm starting. It's either a meeting or it's a new deep work slot I'm doing. But you can also do just 2 time blocks or 3, whatever fits best for you. I already mentioned it, block time for deep work, and it's important that you also put it in your calendar so nobody else can put your meeting in there, and that you again make just be aware that you want to do that. For it, maybe just start with 30 minutes, and of course you can extend that, but it's just that you try to set up this new habit and see what a big difference it can make. And the fourth and final tip is that you really finish and shut down. As I just mentioned it, I was also a big queen in checking emails when I'm done. And I know if you're a founder running your own business, that's important. But our brain is as sensible as is our body, and you could never, even if you do exercise, you would never do them 24 hours or 14 hours. There needs to be a time to shut down. And that's also one of the reasons why the mindfulness is such a big thing, that we need to shut our brains down. The second element is based on activity selection. And I'd like to present you this wicked combination. There's something called planning fallacy, and which says that just as humans, we tend to totally overestimate what we can accomplish in a certain time. And usually that's why so many things end up on our list. And I hardly meet anyone who says, I can tick off all the things on my list by the end of the day. What usually happens, or at least what happened to me, is that I have a huge list of things, and then by the end of the day, I maybe got half through, and I was very like demotivated, and it just doesn't feel good to have this feeling of not completing what you were planning to do. In combination, which is also a term Cal Newport coined, the hyperactive hive mind tasks, because we are so used to sending emails and that people send you just stuff, and we don't really have the time to think and reflect. This is why, because we are lacking deep work, that we don't really think things through, and then we just bounce off tasks and emails, and that's how usually things end up in our emails and tasks we're doing without actively choosing them, because just somebody put it into our list. The habits I'd like to introduce you, and I think my favorite, or one of my favorite ones, is number one, that you choose just your maximal top 3 for the day. Usually for me, it's one task is the deep work. Is a deep work task. The others can be shallow tasks, which is the opposite of deep work. It's just it's just things you don't need to be cognitively involved with, like very easy to do things. You can also do 3 things that are very that require deep work. The basic idea is that you focus on only a little or few things, because what happens is you do not only focus, it's also, it feels so much better by the end of the day if you really accomplish the things you've put on your list, which doesn't mean you can't do more than 3. It's just that you make sure that you've done these, and everything else feels like a benefit. Number 2 is say no more often. That's also probably not something new, but it's just a reality that this is one of the reasons why we don't why we just do too many things. There are so many options, and it's even more important to say no. And it's also a habit, because the more often you say no, the more the easier it gets. And one way to start doing that is starting a stop doing list. It's the opposite of a to-do list. It's listing down everything you're doing. It can be either a habit or a behavior you're doing, like, for example, you always do the things a colleague should be doing, or a co-founder should be doing, or like real topics in terms of like, for example, functions you're doing, and you should make like an audit, like, is this really something on my plate, something that I should be doing? Also, if you're doing too many things in your company at once, because that also means, and that leads me to the third point, that maybe you are not clear on what you should be working on, what your focus should be. And one of the questions I like most is the question, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and unnecessary? Anytime I get stuck because I don't know what I should be focusing on, what my deep sessions should be, I should dedicate to, is that I ask this question. And it can be totally different for all of you. And it was different in the project I'm working on, for example, is that the finances, the financing was a problem, or that the team culture was a problem. Whatever is in your sphere of influence, that's something you should be focusing on. And it's a different way of phrasing the question, what is important? But our brain usually translates important into what is urgent. And number 4, and even if you don't do anything else on that list, is that I just would like to recommend you that you create awareness. Awareness means you look at it with a writer for how you choose your activities. So did you just get aware maybe that this could be a problem, that you're working just on the wrong things? And the final element, and which is now left over, it's the organization, and I'm talking about organization, but in a different way, because we don't have that much time to talk about organization in terms of productivity, like it's meant in this model. I'd like to talk about organization in terms of organization as a whole, and teams, or how they work together. Because one main idea I'd like to present to you is that we should not only be working in the team, but also on the team, because the way of work is changing, and which means that we need to talk about the way we are working together as a team. And yeah, Charlene said it, like, is everybody distracted? Yeah, we are all in the same boat, and there's no team, no company I go to and where I share this idea, or these ideas, is that everybody says, "Oh my God, I'm so happy that you're mentioning this," and teams say, "Oh, I didn't know you have the same problem," because hardly anyone talks about this. So I can just encourage you to talk to your co-members, co-founders, colleagues about this topic, and make it something to talk about. And I assume many of you are working in agile environments, and you're familiar with the experimental approach. So I would recommend that you start with attention. For example, you don't have time for deep work, and maybe the root cause for you is even that your whole work style depends on real-time communication. Then you have a whole new basis to discuss. But you should focus on the biggest tension in your team, talk about it, then come up with a little practice. For example, that you have no meetings or messages on Fridays. Of course, that's a bigger practice. But for example, a friend of mine who runs a startup, they have introduced Think Days on Fridays, where they don't do meetings or messages. Or maybe the only thing you can use, if there's an emergency, you can call someone. But besides that, everybody is just in, like it's a Sunday for them. And then, of course, you also need set expectations, or talk about expectations, like how long do we have to reply to something, or maybe you set up certain office hours for experts, so that they can not be open with for questions for everyone, like 24 hours, but maybe only on certain time slots. And you should define certain rules, but that's up to your team. And then you set up as an experiment, maybe 4 weeks, and then you come back and discuss how it worked or not. And the main idea is that you constantly try and iterate what works best for you, because what works for someone else might be a best practice you can try, but each company or each individual is different. So you should be looking at what's really important, or what's working for you, and just make it a topic. And I'd like to end with that final question: what do you want to try after you've been hearing this, and maybe other inspirations that you take away from this event? Okay. Now we are over time, but maybe there are some, if you still have time and you have questions, I'm very happy to answer them. Oh, okay. Your company is Hive Mind. Yeah. As you said, Clemens, no meetings. Of course, that's something else you can try. Maybe it's also introducing email meetings before a certain time. Okay. Thank you very much. And I see there are comments, but there are no more questions. So I wish you a great time at this event, and I hope you're looking forward to your first deep work session. And maybe one of the, at least that's what I think is a good way to use it. Just write down whatever is in your way of not being able to concentrate. Okay, bye, and thank you.